And a very exciting interview now, and this speaks to someone that I think most of us have heard of at some point in our lives, but stay tuned because we're going to tell you a little more. Now, the Pan-African Center of Namibia, PACON, will confer Posthumous Pan-Afrikan Icon Award on Jamaican-born Marcus Garvey. Now, the award is bestowed upon Pan-Africanists who sacrificed their lives for the liberation of Africa, and the country's cabinet has also approved a decision to rename a street in the capital city of Windhoek after Marcus Garvey. And this morning, we're catching up with Dr. Julius Garvey, who's the son of Marcus Garvey, in South Africa en route to Namibia. Dr. Garvey, thanks so much, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first and foremost, great news there with this award that you will receive, obviously, posthumously on your father's behalf. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm elated. You know, the legacy of Marcus Garvey continues, as does the legacy of Mandela. And it's great to be here in Johannesburg at this particular time when you're celebrating his centenary of his birth and his legacy. And Marcus Garvey is alive and well throughout the diaspora and throughout the continent of Africa. As you know, he was a major Pan-Africanist of the first half of the 20th century, advocating Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad, and indicating that the diaspora had to be a significant part of African development and the African Renaissance. So that's part of why I'm here also in Johannesburg.
And just speaking of, you know, Mandela and the celebrations and the lectures and everything that has gone on, as you say, you've observed some of that. What are your reflections?
Well, he was a great man and definitely an icon. And he engineered basically the birth of a free South Africa and the beginning of a democratic South Africa. Obviously, all of it could not take place at one time in terms of 1994, and it's a process. And I think those of us who are Africans, whether you live in South Africa or elsewhere, we have to realize that we have to take responsibility for the process. In other words, we have to be the change that we want to see. And I think that's the message that Mandela left in terms of his legacy for all South Africans. In the New York Times, there was part of the celebration, there was an article, and a book is coming out about his letters, his prison letters. And there was one that caught my eye. It was a letter to his wife, Winnie Mandela. And he was talking about the benefits of being in solitary confinement, how it was a great time for self-reflection and introspection, and how then you look at your whole life and see your weaknesses and your strengths, and you can transform yourself. And the message out of that was, you know, that a saint is a sinner who keeps on trying and doesn't give up. And I think that's the message and essentially his legacy for South Africa, not to give up in terms of the transformation process. And one has to be intelligent about the transformation process, as he was, in terms of accomplishing what could have been accomplished at that time. But now we have to move the end game further along. And that's part of why I'm here, because I believe that the diaspora has to help in that process. And we're looking towards a global summit, a global marketplace summit here in Johannesburg in October 12th and 13th. We're bringing businesses and businessmen, entrepreneurs with capital and with resources from the diaspora to participate with businesses here. We believe that the whole development process needs to take place around small and medium-sized businesses. We need to develop the agricultural space as well as the manufacturing space. You know, you must be able to feed yourself. We're very interested in food security, African food security. Malnutrition is a problem. You know, the development of agriculture is the basis of any country. And we'll be meeting with Dr. Chitsungi and so on and seeing her farm. We've met with other people involved in small and medium-sized businesses here on this particular trip. So we're about building a bridge, or bridges, shall we say, in terms of the African diaspora, both in the Americas and the Caribbean. part of what's going to happen in Namibia is going to be twinning of the city of Kingston, Jamaica, with Windhoek. And also an MOU will be signed between the Prime Minister of Jamaica and the President of Namibia. So the diaspora needs to come closer together with the motherland. Those of us who left involuntarily or those who have left voluntarily, we need to bring our skills and resources back to help to develop the motherland.
And it all sounds very exciting, but I must just ask you, with regard to Pan-Africanism, and if I just, look at what's happening here in South Africa and parties that one would want to categorize as espousing that philosophy of Pan-Africanism, you look at the Pan-Africanist Congress of South Africa, you look at AZAPO and all these other smaller little parties, and for some reason, they are not making a mark on the electorate. They're not doing well in elections. Why do you think, and I know you may not be too familiar with the South African political context to that extent, but why do you think it's so difficult for the Pan-Africanist ideology to actually take root with Africans? I think there's a lot of ego is involved. And people take one aspect of Pan-Africanism and wed themselves to that and believe that that is exclusively the way in which we should go forward as an African people. And therefore, you get rivalry in terms of leadership and so on. And leadership is about, servant leadership. I think your own Ruel Koza has talked about that. My father always, signed Marcus Garvey, your obedient servant. I mean, it's about servant leadership, and I think the quality of leadership is what is missing. In my father's organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association African Communities League, you had all different religions involved, so that religion per se was not a problem, although it was a very spiritual message, and so that everybody could approach it from the spiritual perspective as opposed to a religious dogmatic perspective. And the same thing with different political aspirations. However, you had people who were communists who wanted to disrupt it and move it in a communist direction and so on and so forth, and other people going in different directions. So it needs a leadership to coalesce people so that people will follow the leader, and the leader will be able to give the message that unites everybody, even though they might have slight differences here and there in how they interpret different things. So I think that is one of the problems. The other side of that is that our leadership has been destroyed over time, such as Mandela spending 27 years in prison, such as Steve Biko, Sobukwe, so many other people, Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey. Our leadership, whenever it's been genuine leadership and servant leadership in the interests of the people, that has been marginalized or destroyed. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, both killed, etc., when they were trying to transform a system, that was taking advantage of Africans, whether in the Americans, in the Caribbean, or here. So, Dr.
yes.
Julius Garvey, really appreciate you stopping by, and some sage words there, and we'll see how this actually plays out. That was Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of Pan-Africanist Marcus Garvey, talking about his father will be receiving a posthumous Pan-African Icon Award for the sacrifices that he made for black liberation in the 20th century.